With the release of Splatoon 3 and the recent announcement of the two-part expansion pass, I think it's about time I revamp this series and go in depth on the story so far. So if you enjoyed watching this video and would like to see more, hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Hey all, Scotch Tate here, and welcome to the second episode of An Open Journal. This is a series where I touch upon very specific topics about different games and content out there, and go in depth into the major details of the storytelling, as well as major details in the plot and other secrets that we can find. This is an open journal, so any of you can bring in your takes, talk about things, and perhaps even bring in your own ideas to the table. This isn't meant for me to just share my own ideas of what something could be about, as this is open to anyone, and it's an open discussion. So feel free to leave something in the comments, and I'll be sure to read it over, and I'll be sure to enjoy whatever discussions you all have there. And without further ado, let's begin. Quick disclaimer though. Before we start, most of this information I'm getting is coming directly from the Splatoon wiki page, which details the timeline to its entirety regarding all three games plus Octo expansion. And perhaps we'll get to dive into what we could see coming to Splatoon 3 Side Order, which is the second part of the expansion pass for Splatoon 3 that was recently announced in the last Nintendo Direct. Starting off with a brief overview of what this timeline looks like, the wiki splits it into 6 different sections. That being, before the Great Turf War, which was about 12,000 years ago, the Mollusk Era, which is about 2,000 years before the start of the main game, the Great Turf War and other events about a century before the start of the first game, Splatoon 1, Splatoon 2, which starts 2 years after the first game, and Splatoon 3, which takes place 5 years after Splatoon 2. Considering the huge amount of lore dumped in each game, there's going to be a lot to talk about. Around 12,000 years ago, a cat named Judd is born. This cat, as we know, is the cat that judges the matches in all 3 games, with Lil Judd, and I'll touch on him a little later on, first appearing in the second game. Also around this time, this fax machine in which the Splatfest events are announced on is created, but the location of this fax machine is unknown at this time. Meanwhile, a professor created a sentient telephone that recorded the knowledge of humanity and watched from a distance. This same professor also created the cryogenic chamber, which he used to preserve his cat, Judd, by freezing him in order to keep him safe. The planet, which is later confirmed to be Earth, began flooding due to the increase in global warming and climate change, drowning out much of the flora and fauna of the planet's surface. However, several humans managed to survive by residing in an underground area named Alterna. Another group of humans developed what's called the Arc Polaris, a space shuttle with the mission of finding the humans another planet to reside on. They took several mammals with them, and they drifted in space for about 10,000 years. With all of the animals hibernating, there was no known sentient life form on the planet for 8,000 years, leading up to what is known as the Mollusk Era. 2,000 years before the start of the first game, water levels began to recede, forcing many marine creatures on what used to be Earth's dry land to evolve and become more intelligent. Some of these creatures develop humanoid structures, but have some differences between them. These creatures being the Inklings and the Octolings. You can tell these differences because Inklings have that line on their face connecting both of their eyes, and their suction cups are on the inside of their hair. And the Octolings have suction cups on the outside of their hair, and they have no line in between their eyes present. At this point, Judd the cat emerges from his cryogenic chamber, becoming the judge of some of the earliest known turf wars. Meanwhile, the Arc Polaris lands back on Earth with one of the animals emerging from it. One of the bears taken on the expedition. But this bear realizes something was very wrong while exploring the Earth. It wasn't in fact on a different planet. It was actually on Earth, sometime after they launched the Arc Polaris. And at this point, there wasn't a single mammal to be found. Around a century before the first game takes place, the city of Inkopolis in Calamari County are founded. Calamari County creates a customary chorus meant to celebrate and respect the bounty of the sea. At this time, two prominent characters in the game's story are born. That being Captain Cuttlefish and DJ Octavio. They both become their respective leaders of both the Inklings and the Octarians, or the Octolings. But as sea levels began to rise again, this turn of events forced the Inklings and the Octarians to wage war against each other over who gets to keep the remaining dry land, leading the Octarians to build what are known as the Great Octo Weapons. During the Great Turf War, Captain Cuttlefish creates the Squid Splatoon with 3 other members, potentially including Sheldon, the weaponsmith in the game, his grandfather, Amoses Schellendorf, as its leader. Amoses Schellendorf goes on to create 5 or 8 blueprints for weapons, including one of the Hero Shot replica. As the war raged on, the Inklings were being decimated on the battlefield, as the Octarians reigned supreme with their octo weapons. But there was a glaring flaw with their design, that being a plug literally being pulled off, deactivating their weaponry and allowing the Inklings to remain victorious. The Octarians were sent into hiding into Octo Valley and Octo Canyon, where they built and lived in underground domes. After the Great Turf War, a legendary creature is born. It is known as the Great Zapfish. As this discovery was made, its electricity was put to use and powered Inkopolis, but also migrates to the area of Splatsville as well. As time moved on from the war, turf wars became a popular competitive sport instead of a serious conflict. Squid kids could decimate each other on skate parks, shopping malls, hell, even a museum. "30 years before the events of the first game, DJ Octavio gives himself a bit of a change of pace by becoming a fully fledged DJ. At this time, the underground domes the Octarians reside in began to show signs of collapsing, and also began to lose power. 4 years later, Pearl, one half of the group Off the Hook, was born. 2 years later, Callie and Marie of the Squid sisters are born in Calamari County. 1 year after that, Marina, the other half of Off the Hook, was born. 2 years after Marina was born, our main protagonist of the first game, Agent 3, is born. And then Agents 4 and 8 2 years after. 18 years before the events of the first game, Inkopolis hosts its first annual Youth Folk Singing Contest. Marie and Callie participate and end up winning the contest, kickstarting their career and fame as singers. Pearl, on the other hand, got kicked out of this contest. Starting off the first game, characters Annie, Mo, Krusty Sean, and Jalonzo, as well as Sheldon, began operating their shops at the Booyah base in Inkopolis Plaza. The band Squid Squad becomes an active turning point in Inkling music. As for the Squid sisters, they began their career as announcers for Splatfests and other events on the Inkopolis newscast. When you first start the game, you're greeted with a news segment announcing that the Great Zapfish had been stolen. Turns out, it was the Octarians who stole it and wandered off with the other Zapfish from Inkopolis. How do we know this? Now here we meet Agent 3. Agent 3 notices a strange old man going into a drain, and when following suit, turns out to be this old man is actually Captain Cuttlefish. There, Agent 3 becomes the newest recruit for what's called the new Squid Splatoon, along with Agents 1 and 2. There, they work as undercover agents who attempt to rescue the Zapfish from the Octarians' control. Agent 3 launches multiple attacks on Octo Valley to save each of the Zapfish and destroy the great Octo weapons in the process. Agent 3 also acquires the different plans left by Amoses Schellendorf, but then Captain Cuttlefish gets taken and brought to DJ Octavio's base, where DJ Octavio is ultimately defeated. During this fight, Agents 1 and 2, who turn out to be the Squid sisters, help Agent 3 by playing what is known as the Calamari Incantation, which is said to have the power to make an Octoling want to defect from the Octarian forces. In Splatoon 2, Sunken Scroll number 2 reveals that the final battle was actually interpreted as a huge concert to the Octarian audience. And if you look closely, Marina is present and jamming out to the music. When the battle is finally over, DJ Octavio is imprisoned in a snow globe and cast aside until the events of Splatoon 2. However, the events of the first game don't end here. In each game, there exists a special event that happens every so often, known as a Splatfest. It can be either dogs versus cats, burgers versus pizza, anything goes. Back in June of 2016, it was announced that the final Splatfest in Splatoon 1 would be sister versus sister, Callie versus Marie. This was a huge turning point in the series, and was all up to player participation to decide on how the story would progress. In the end, Team Marie ended up winning as the final Splatfest came to a close. This became very important to the plot of the next game, as a few months before it released, Nintendo released what's called the Squid Sisters story, a web series detailing the events of the game after the final Splatfest. Here is what each of the chapters had to bring to the table. Starting off in the prologue, this story takes about 9 months after the final Splatfest. But we're going back to when it all happened, the night the final Splatfest came to an end. According to our narrator, even though Marie came out on top, her and Callie never had any ill will between them. They left the studio arm in arm, smiling and laughing as they always had. It seemed that their bond would continue unbroken for years to come. Or so it seemed at the time. The final Splatfest had the Squid Sisters' career skyrocket to new heights. Callie and Marie went from being Inkopolis idols to the biggest stars in Inkling society, seemingly overnight. Their days became filled from day to night with the job of this newfound fame. Callie and Marie still lived in the first apartment they rented upon moving to Inkopolis. They never gave any thought to living apart. But after releasing their first solo recordings, their work started taking them down different paths. Callie continued making appearances on multiple shows. There were times that she didn't even return home at all. Marie, on the other hand, got a ton of praise for her song Tide Goes Out, and became a frequent guest on music shows. The two ended up spending less time together as the days went on. Marie spent time at home alone. It wasn't long until she would return to her frantic work pace, but there were times where she would often drift off in her thoughts. How did Callie really feel when the Splatfest results had been announced? Marie had played it off as if she was overthinking things, and left it like that. One day, Callie was awoken by a call from her manager. Her manager had said that the recording session that she was scheduled for was delayed in order to accommodate a different performer. Callie was set on making the most of her unexpected break. But something was off. There was no sign of Marie in the apartment. She was sure Marie had the day off as well. It was 8 a.m, so there was no way Marie could be out shopping at such an early hour. Callie decided to get dressed and go out in search of her roommate. Now that she thought about it, Marie did seem down lately. Like there was something on her mind she couldn't stop thinking about. Perhaps she was tired from working too hard, or maybe something happened that managed to upset her. Callie thought that worrying about her all day wasn't going to fix anything. Eventually, Callie found Marie at a cafe with Krusty Sean. They were seated at a table just chatting. Maybe it was because their hometowns were so close to one another that Callie and Marie found Krusty Sean easy to talk to. Marie always was a bit shy when she first arrived in the city. Callie couldn't remember the last time she'd seen Marie talking so cheerfully with someone besides her. Callie didn't want to spoil their fun, so she went back to the apartment. There, Callie made breakfast when Marie returned, and when Marie saw this, she was surprised Callie was even up at the time, and they both greeted each other. Callie invited Marie to go shopping together, and Marie gladly accepted. How long had it been since the two visited Arowana Mall in their free time? They wandered past new stores and some of their old favorites, enjoying the leisure of window shopping. They both worked up an appetite and decided to sit down at a cafe for lunch. At times like these, their conversations shifted to the work they had been doing lately. They swapped stories about co-stars, but more importantly, they were each worried about each other, but neither of them wanted to darken the mood by talking about anything too serious. Callie decided to mention that she saw Marie talking with Krusty Sean that morning, and while Marie was caught off guard by it, she started talking about the conversation with Krusty Sean. It turned out Krusty Sean had quit his job at Shrimp Kicks, the shoe store present at Inkopolis Plaza. It turns out he had been the store manager there for years, but had a dream to open up a place of his own. A friend had introduced a new opportunity, and Sean had gone for it. According to Krusty Sean, Ani had been looking into getting a new job. It turns out she never really was a people anemone and felt like she'd given the retail the old college try. She had been keeping herself busy, helping decorate weapons for Sheldon and Ammonites. The more she did it, the more she enjoyed it. As for Sheldon, he was busy himself, planning to expand Ammonites to a second location. He had his eyes set on a prime spot in the part of town that was quickly becoming the new hot location for the turf war scene. Then, the conversation turned toward Captain Cuttlefish. More importantly, the sisters hadn't seen him around lately, considering their schedules had kept them too busy to give him a proper visit. However, they hadn't seen him poke his head out of the manhole recently either. This was no reason to panic, considering they took out the Octarians earlier on. Surely the old rascal would turn up sooner or later. They got lost in conversation, and time had slipped away. Callie and Marie went home and remembered how much fun they had when they were together. Marie was packing clothes into her suitcase. She was getting ready for a trip home to Calamari County. The trip had come about somewhat suddenly thanks to her finding herself with rare 3 days off in a row. Rehearsals for a new show were set to start after her trip, so she knew she wouldn't have time to go if she waited. Marie extended the invitation to Callie, but unfortunately she had an appointment she couldn't miss that day, so Marie went off by herself. Callie saw her off to the station. The train to Calamari County takes about 3.5 hours to get there. Marie felt lonely without Callie by her side. Marie hadn't been home in a long time, and her parents were happy to see her. They sat on their porch together as Marie told them all about their latest accolades in Inkopolis. She was reminded just how much she enjoyed the place she grew up in. From time to time as she spoke, Marie's parents interjected with questions about Callie. Each time Marie replied that yes, of course, Callie was doing fine. But with each question, she winced, as if pricked by an unseen needle. Marie struggled to answer her parents' questions in an upbeat manner. She was struck by the realization that she didn't really know how Callie was doing at all. But Callie would be coming the next day. One look at her face would dispel those nagging feelings of guilt. The next day found Marie waiting at the train station for Callie's arrival. When the train had pulled in, though, Callie wasn't on board. Marie began to think that Callie had overslept, so she settled in and waited. Callie wasn't on the next train, or the one after that, or the one after. Eventually, night fell, and there was still no sign of her. Marie called Callie's office and was told that she'd headed straight home from work the previous evening. Callie's manager said they figured that she was in a hurry to get back to Calamari County. Marie tried their apartment several times, but no one picked up. Marie began to feel panic rising in her chest. The following morning, Marie cut her trip short and returned to Inkopolis on the first train of the day. She hated to leave her parents so suddenly, but she couldn't shake the feeling about being worried about Callie. Plagued by a sense of unease, she spent the whole trip on her phone, searching for some clue as to Callie's whereabouts. Her efforts failed to turn up anything. When she arrived in Inkopolis, Marie headed straight for their apartment, and the place looks exactly as she left it. In fact, there was no sign of Callie being at home at all since Marie had left for her trip. But if she hadn't come home, where could she have gone? Marie went to Octo Valley as fast as she could. Captain Cuttlefish's shack was completely deserted. The shack itself was undisturbed, But the snow globe that had stood beside it was a shattered wreck. DJ Octavio had escaped. Callie was nowhere to be found, and the scene unfortunately didn't offer up any clues. Marie returned to Inkopolis. The city had been buzzing with unbelievable news. The great Zapfish had disappeared. It had vanished once before, but reappeared shortly thereafter. Marie made up her mind to get to the bottom of this. But if their adversary was who she suspected, this problem would have no quick and easy solution. Captain Cuttlefish wasn't around to help this time. Her worry for Callie overshadowed everything. And before long, the Squidisons of Inkopolis noticed Callie's absence. If Marie were to disappear, it would only add to the chaos. There was no choice but to find help, and quickly. Just as Captain Cuttlefish had done before, she would need to enlist a brave recruit to help investigate the depths of the Octarians' underground base. Thanks to her fame, though, Marie stood out like a sore thumb. She needed to keep the number of people who knew about the new Octarian threat to a minimum. Secrecy and discretion were, after all, of the utmost importance when it came to the operations of the new Squidbeak Splatoon. Suddenly, the conversation she'd had with Callie at Arowana Mall came rushing back to her. Word on the street was that all the freshest Inklings were hanging out at a new part of town. Surely she could find someone there with the perfect blend of talent and bravery. With her mind made up, she had set her sights on Inkopolis Square. And with that, the timeline moves on to the events of Splatoon 2. At this point in the timeline, the company Grizzco Industries is founded and managed by Mr. Grizz, someone who we never actually get to see their face until we meet them in Splatoon 3. The whole premise of this was to introduce a new playable mode in Splatoon known as Salmon Run. This is where the species known as salmonids migrates to the waters outside of Inkopolis as they undergo their migration for about every 70 years. Funny enough, they also prepare to attack Inkopolis. After the final boss battle, as mentioned before in Splatoon 1, Marina defects from the Octarian army to become a citizen of Inkopolis after listening to the Calamari incantation, thus becoming a huge fan of the Squid sisters in the process. Along with Pearl, they start their own group, Off the Hook. New characters open up their businesses in Inkopolis Square at the Galleria. These characters are Flo, Biss, and Gelfonso. Sheldon also joins them by opening a second location of his Ammonite store, like he originally planned. As mentioned before, Marie won the final Splatfest that she and her cousin hosted. Yes, Callie and Marie aren't actually sisters. They are in fact cousins. No Splatfests occur between the time of Splatoon 1 and Splatoon 2, until the arrival of a new band called Off the Hook. Inkopolis News also becomes the new hub for Turf Wars, and the Inkopolis News Studio was relocated to Inkopolis Square. Continuing with Marie's story, Marie enlists the help of a new Squid Kid formerly dubbed Agent 4. Together with Sheldon, the three recover Zapfish from the resurgent Octarians. Sometime between stages, Agent 4 and Marie receive a signal from a comlink. The sounds oddly sounds like Callie. Later on in the final stage of the game, Agent 4 and Marie stumble upon Callie standing on DJ Octavio's stage, where they find that she's been brainwashed under DJ Octavio's control. As the fight raged on, eventually Marie was able to break Callie free of the brainwashing by using her specialized charger and shooting low-tide ink to bring Callie back to her senses. Then, Callie did just that. She joined Marie in performing a new iteration of the Calamari incantation, with some added spice. Finally, Agent 4 beats DJ Octavio with a Rainmaker, and the great Zapfish has returned to Inkopolis. All is good again, until it isn't. Now we move on to Octo Expansion. But this is different, as it doesn't really happen after Splatoon 2's Hero Mode. Rather, it happens simultaneously to Splatoon 2's Story Mode. As Marie reveals that Agent 3 and Captain Cuttlefish were out on a mission while she was in Octo Canyon. Agent 3 and Captain Cuttlefish face off against an Octoling, but this Octoling was exposed to the first calamari incantation from the first game, and had a change of heart. The two fought until an unknown assailant captured all three of them and dragged them into an area known as the Deep Sea Metro. Here, when we finally get control of the character, we're referred to as test subject 10,008, implying that 10,007 unfortunate souls perished in the Deep Sea Metro, but for unknown reasons. Captain Cuttlefish becomes friends with the Octoling, and after hearing their test subject number, refers to the Octoling as Agent 8. Agent 8 is tasked with having to complete a series of tests in order to collect what's called the 4 Thangs. Yes, Thangs, not things, Thangs with an A. This task was brought to them by the sentient telephone we mentioned earlier. Then, they meet the conductor of the Deep Sea Metro, a sea cucumber named Sea Cucumber, who explains the functionality of the CQ-80 system. Eventually, Pearl and Marina intercepts Agent 8's signal and offers their support from the sidelines. Once Agent 8 collects all 4 Thangs, the telephone assembles a machine that is supposed to bring Captain Cuttlefish and Agent 8 back to the surface. But it turns out, this machine is actually an oversized blender, with the purpose of turning Agent 8 and Captain Cuttlefish into a sanitizing ooze. But then, Agent 3 pops out of nowhere to bust them out of the blender and gets knocked out in the process, leaving the breakout efforts on Agent 8's shoulders. Later on, when we're nearly at the top of the facility, Agent 8 is forced to fight Agent 3 once again, as the telephone pole ended up mind-controlling Agent 3. Agent 8 comes out victorious, and everyone manages to reach the surface. As the telephone seems to have other plans, when they get there, Marina and Pearl appear to rescue them. On their helicopter ride, a giant statue emerges from the depths of the ocean. Inside is the sentient telephone, revealing itself to be known as Commander Tartar, a sentient AI created by the professor from 12,000 years ago as a last-ditch effort to aid the development of the next dominant species. While this sounds cool, Tartar strayed off of his original programming because of how disgusted he was by the hedonistic nature of the Inklings and Octarians. It sought to create a master race of sanitized Octarians. With the help from Marina and Pearl, Agent 8 went on a fully fledged turf war-esque tirade on the statue and went completely ham on it by using Marina's hyper bombs, and after managing to cover every part of the statue with ink, Pearl finished it off with her princess cannon. In the end, it was a job well done. Agent 8 joined Pearl and Marina on their way back to Inkopolis Square. Agent 3 goes out on patrol, and Captain Cuttlefish returns to the Deep Sea Metro to check in on the denizens of the deep for a little while longer. Finally, we move on to Splatoon 3. A few months before the start of the game, Agent 3 is promoted to Captain, with Craig Cuttlefish passing on the torch and going into retirement. The Great Zapfish is taken again. So this time, another Inkling or Octoling is enlisted to the new Squid platoon by Craig Cuttlefish. This Inkling or Octoling, however, has a story of their own. Before the events of the game, you meet their small salmon companion named Small Fry. This duo is a pair of scrap hunters who search for junk gems by day and splat it up in turf wars on the side. After going into the manhole with Cuttlefish, they end up in an area known as the Crater. Here, they are formally dubbed the new Agent 3, as the previous one was promoted to Captain before the events of this game. There's something different about this new area compared to the previous games. That being, there is now a ton of fuzzy ooze present around the area. In order to get through the fuzzy ooze, this is where Small Fry comes in. Small Fry is able to eat the ooze after consuming a certain amount of power eggs. Yes, the same one you can get from Salmon Run. After progressing down into the crater, Cuttlefish takes notice of the fact that the Octarians they're currently facing actually have fur grown all over their body. Which is unusual because they aren't mammals, obviously. As Cuttlefish contacts Agents 1 and 2, DJ Octavio shows up in a new battle mech called the Octobot King L3.GS, trying to confront the new agent and the former captain about the recent disappearance of his Octarian army. But when asked about the Great Zapfish, DJ Octavio tells him that he doesn't even know what about it at the time, and picks a fight with the new Agent 3. After Agent 3 beats the shit out of him, Octavio reassures them that he wasn't the one who took it, and Cuttlefish begins to think that someone else has something to do with it. But before they can proceed, the ground beneath them collapses as fuzzy ooze flows out. A piece of ooze takes former Captain Cuttlefish away from Agent 3, who also uses their new hero soup and power eggs in the fall. Agent 3 then wakes up in an underground area known as Alterna, which is divided between a few islands present around the place. There, they meet Captain 3 and the Squid sisters. Here, we are also guided by a new AI being introduced, known as the Omniscient Recording Computer of Alterna, or Orca for short. Orca is an AI created by the scientists who built Alterna. Its purpose is to record and preserve the knowledge gathered by the surviving Alternan humans. After going into the first kettle, it explains the basics of missions needed to be completed from that point forward, and began collecting information on Agent 3, referring to them as a citizen of Alterna. At the end of the first area, Deep Cut makes their storyline debut, and they make themselves very clear. Deep Cut consists of 3 members, and they also work for the Inkopolis newscast in Splatsville. Shiver, an octoling who is familiar with the power of sharks, Fry, who is familiar with the power of eels, and Big Man, who's just a big stingray, with stingray powers. Turns out, this group isn't as nice as they made themselves out to be, despite their good intentions, because they assert their dominance and insist that whatever treasures are present in Alterna, that it all belongs to them. So they guard the 3 crucial points, and it's up to Agent 3 to go to each of them to make their way closer to the center of Alterna. One glaring detail about Alterna at first glance is the fact that the middle is booming with fuzzy ooze. So after obtaining all 3 treasure parts, it turns out that when putting it all together, it becomes a lawnmower. Captain 3 ends up using this treasure and ends up cutting away all of the fuzzy ooze on the central island where the giant rocket is present. Turns out, this giant rocket is actually the Arc Polaris that landed back on Earth long ago. On their way to the rocket, the party overhears that the main culprit of the Zapfish napping is actually Mr. Grizz. Yeah, the boss man from Grizzco. Remember those little golden eggs that you had to obtain while going on salmon run missions? Yeah, this is what they were put to use for, as they play a key role in Mr. Grizz's plan to restore the balance of the world. After reaching the top of Arc Polaris, we find a dried up cuttlefish sitting on top. The poor sap was killed in action. That was until Captain 3 sheds a tear on him, and that brings him back to life. And with that, Deep Cut helps Agent 3 one last time by sending them straight into space to catch up to Mr. Grizz, as by this point, the rocket had already launched. When hopping on the rocket, Agent 3 and Mr. Grizz have one final fight. But unfortunately, Agent 3 doesn't win this one, as Mr. Grizz knocked both Agent 3 and Small Fry off the rocket, as he absorbs all of the fuzzy ooze he accumulated into one shot, planning to send it flying toward the Earth himself. But all hope isn't lost, as DJ Octavio makes a comeback. Now knowing who the culprit was, he appears in his modified mech to save our heroes. And so, DJ Octavio, the Squid sisters, and Deep Cut play the 3rd iteration of the Calamari incantation, Calamari Incantation 3 Mix. Small Fry transforms and becomes Huge Fry, who then fights Mr. Grizz as DJ Octavio and Agent 3 vacuum the fuzzballs on Mr. Grizz's body, before blasting him back with the ooze, defeating him. After finishing the fight, DJ Octavio, Agent 3, and Small Fry return to Earth together. We've now covered the extensive timeline of the Splatoon series, but we haven't really touched on one thing: how Alterna was actually created. The wiki doesn't actually go into detail about the creation of Alterna in the timeline, yet there's one thing we can actually go off of, that being the Alterna Logs. As you complete missions in Splatoon 3, you unlock chunks of 6 different logs, with one extra being decrypted after completing the mission after Alterna. Now, in each of these logs, it details what exactly happened before any of the events of this game, or any of the other games, happened. So here, we're going to read through each of the logs, and we're going to see what actually happened prior to the events of all of the games. So starting off with log number 1, the fall of humanity. As technology began to advance at an exponential rate, so too did prosperity, and also conflict. Before long, the entire world was embroiled, directly implying that the world potentially went into a nuclear war at some point before everything went wrong. At the end of it all, nearly all life on Earth was completely wiped out. Natural disasters intensified. Volcanic eruptions leveled cities. The sea levels began to consume the planet. Soon, the surface of the Earth became a wasteland, completely inhospitable to life. Against the odds to be 42,791 to 1 some humans survived. These survivors found shelter in a vast cavern created by a cataclysmic volcanic eruption. This cavern provided shelter, and a massive pool of accumulated seawater provided life. For a while, humanity was being decimated, and marine life flourished. All manner of squid, octopuses, and jellyfish had propagated in the deep. The surviving humans had found a source of sustenance. Log 002, the rise of civilization. Again. The surviving humans appointed scientists to lead their new society, believing that science would provide a wiser path forward. Fully empowered, these scientists took on the monumental task of establishing a sustainable ecosystem within the cavern. They dubbed this new society Alterna, and began the process of recreating the Earth they had once known. Of course, not even scientists are immune to nostalgia. The humans began constructing large-scale 3D printing operations. This allowed them to recreate some of humanity's favorite artifacts within the confines of Alterna. Additionally, they created a robust information management system designed to indelibly record all of humanity's precious knowledge. Such a system would naturally require some sort of record keeper, a computer that could autonomously observe and record data. The scientists achieved their aim with the development of Orca, also known as the Omniscient Recording Computer of Alterna. Log 003, A New Sky. As life in Alterna moved forward, one scientist discovered a new way to make liquid crystals from the bodily fluids of squids. These new crystals could change color in response to faint and fleeting electrical signals emitted by living organisms. To put that in more human terms, these crystals could read minds, and then output imagery that matched the viewer's innermost thoughts. Humans were enchanted with this new invention, and began mass-producing the crystals. Eventually, they lined the walls and roof of Alterna. As the crystals observed the collective desires of those in Alterna, they assumed the appearance of the sky as it was seen on the surface long ago. At last, after 25 years of being confined beneath the earth, humanity could once again look up and see the sky. Log 004, humanity's final day. The years passed with prosperity. The population of Alterna grew like a rising tide. The scientists, now elders of their kind, believed that they had done all they could to advance the civilization of Alterna. They began selecting new leaders to succeed them, entrusting them the world they had helped build. Humanity's new leaders inherited both the brilliance of their predecessors and their unquenchable thirst for innovation. This new generation, born and raised deep in Alterna, would prove to be every bit the match of those they were to succeed. They soon grew restless at the sight of the liquid crystal sky, believing they deserved to behold the reality that existed outside the cavern. The elders, who knew what awaited outside the safe haven of Alterna, issued stern warnings to the brash young scientists. Nevertheless, the young scientists pressed on with their plan, the construction of a massive rocket ship to escape Alterna. Sadly, as the boosters were ignited for the first time during a launch test, tragedy struck. The energy from the rocket boosters overloaded the cavern's liquid crystals. A violent and terrible chain reaction ensued. Without warning, the stone walls of the cavern began to shatter, raining debris down upon humanity. Alterna, the last civilization of once prosperous humanity, was no more, and those few who escaped the carnage would soon follow it into death. Log 005. Fresh intelligence awakens. As the inner walls of Alterna collapsed, thousands of tons of rock and liquid crystal plunged into the waters below. As these crystals washed to and fro amongst the flotsam and jetsam of humanity's former colony, they broke into microscopic fragments. Because they had repeatedly absorbed and reflected humanity's wishes over so many years, the crystals retained those feelings. Little by little, the squids and octopuses and assorted sea creatures that thrived in the waters of Alterna absorbed these crystals into their bodies. This process continued until one day, the marine organisms began to feel something. Something fresh. These fresh impulses bore a striking resemblance to humanity's passive desire to return to the Earth's surface. Spurred by these impulses and whatever else that may be floating in the polluted waters, the sea creatures began to evolve rapidly. Each species developed pulmonary respiration, mobility, and other traits consistent with land-dwelling creatures. They began to adapt. Their intelligence grew at a remarkable pace across generations. Some species even gained extraordinary camouflage abilities. A point of no return arrived. The sea creatures of Alterna set foot on dry land and never looked back. Like humans, they strove for the surface. Of course, survival on land was harsh, but the creatures were persistent. Soon, they found the tunnels that humans had used to escape the apocalypse. With their path forward now clear, these fresh, fledgling beings left the ruins of Alterna behind and set their sights on the surface world. Log 006, the Land of Fresh Beginnings. The beings that had emerged from the water soon emerged from the cavern of Alterna itself. From there, they flourished quickly. It wasn't long before they had explored every corner of the world. This epochal event gave great significance to the crater above Alterna and its surrounding territories, now referred to as the Splatlands. The region would, from that point on, be known as the Land of Fresh Beginnings, among the creatures that now thrive on the surface. These newly evolved beings, having scattered themselves across the globe, soon gave rise to distinct cultures and unique ways of life. Out of all the species now roaming the earth, squids and octopuses soon distinguished themselves via intelligence and fresh vibes, so to speak. It wasn't long before they became the apex species of the planet. Now, I must fast forward a bit. 5,000 years later, a peculiar individual was born. This squid quickly rose to fame in the Splatlands due to some unique characteristics. Yes, this individual was embraced as a prophet, gifted with numerous revelations that they shared among their fellow squids. It was another turning point for squid kind. During this period, the foundations for modern cephalopod civilization were laid. That individual squid is now widely known and celebrated as a progenitor of the modern-day inkling. And here finally, we have the last log able to be obtained after completing the mission after Alterna. Log.exe, Return of the Mammalians. Recall for a moment the first apocalypse that devastated the human race. Those who escaped into the caverns of Alterna were not the sole survivors. There were others who escaped via a giant rocket ship, the Ark Polaris, launched in the nick of time. This ship was laden with many of Earth's species that had been placed in a cold sleep. The mission was simple: find another planet to replace Earth. Considering the circumstances of its launch, the Polaris had a smooth voyage until it reached the edge of the solar system. It was at that point that debris struck the vessel, damaging its navigation system. The crew was able to turn the ship around and head back toward the Earth. But the effort was in vain. There was not enough fuel to attempt a landing. The Ark Polaris drifted aimlessly for 10,000 years. Eons passed. The once stable orbit of the Polaris decayed over time until the ship found itself in the inescapable pull of the Earth's gravity. Re-entry was not kind to its inhabitants. All perished, save one. Bear number 3. An experimental subject who had retained consciousness within his cold hibernation survived. For 12,000 years, he had dreamed and plotted. Fully awakened, Bear number 3 came to a terrible realization. He had not landed on a new planet at all. He was back on Earth. And yet, it was not an Earth he knew. This Earth, it seemed, was dominated by sea creatures. Not a single mammal to be found. In the course of his search for a single fellow mammal, Bear number 3 used navigational equipment from the wreckage of the Ark Polaris to discover Alterna. It was a wasteland, of course, but a few of the liquid crystals that had once covered the walls and ceilings remained. With knowledge built during his thousands of years of dreaming, he repaired some of Alterna's facilities and began researching the crystals. This research bore fruit when Bear number 3 compounded some of the liquid crystals with his own fur. The experiment created an entirely new substance with one terrifying property. It could transform any living creature into a mammal. Bear number 3 realized the implications immediately. He could restore the planet to a mammalian paradise. He began stockpiling fuzzy ooze, as he called it, with an Alterna's still intact rocket. For such a venture, he would require the acquisition of thousands of golden eggs. These were used in the creation of the fuzzy ooze, although the exact details have never been recorded in my memory banks. But Bear number 3 had a plan. He founded a corporation that would go on to employ locals to collect his golden eggs under the name Grisco Industries. Mr. Grizz, as he was now known, would pay handsomely for them. With fuzzy ooze production peaking thanks to the assistance of unsuspecting inklings and octolings, Mr. Grizz took the final steps to set his plan in motion. The rocket was loading. It wouldn't be long now. And with that, we've now wrapped up the entirety of the story up to this point. So what's left? We've pretty much covered all of the bases here. But what's next for the storyline? While I can't be too sure what we could expect, I think we might have a general idea for what's to come. Looking at the start of the new trailer for Splatoon 3 Side Order, we're clearly present on Inkopolis Square, the hub location from Splatoon 2. But it's all bleached out. You can tell because of the presence of white coral everywhere. The camera pans down to a lone Octolink standing in the middle of where the street is supposed to be, and we see different images as the trailer progresses. We see depictions of Pearl and Marina, and other abstract imagery until we see the camera pan toward Deca Tower, where we can see it doesn't look much like the Deca Tower we're used to. It's different. Then we hear voices, perhaps Pearl and Marina, and get more flashing images, depicting more of Marina, and images of the Octoling we could see standing in the trailer. An image of the Octoling sitting like how Agent 8 crouched down at the end of Octo expansion is also present. As more flashing images appear, we get a full view of a bleached Inkopolis square, and a school of fish swimming about in the air. Now, as odd as this trailer was, I think this isn't actually taking place after the events of Splatoon 3's story. In fact, this new story DLC might actually be a prequel to what we've already seen. More specifically, this prequel is about Agent 8's story. Think about it. The abstract imagery, the images of Pearl and Marina, Agent 8's crouching position, it all lines up with our protagonist from Octo expansion. Not to mention that if you look back at Octo expansion, all of the memory cakes that could be collected in that game, in fact, hold a much deeper meaning, as all of the descriptions for each of these memory cakes are poetic. So there's a lot more symbolism behind this trailer, as we can see, but we don't really have much to go off of. When does this take place? Who are we really focusing on? Are we going to talk about the backstory of Agent 8? The backstory of Marina? And what's with the white tower in the middle? What does it all mean? There's a number of ideas out there, but for now, that's all the speculation we have at this moment. We've now come to the end of the timeline here. We've covered a lot of tracks in this video, and if you made it this far, that's pretty cool, and I hope you enjoyed it. I know that this video was actually a lot more serious than my other videos, and there weren't a lot of jokes to be thrown around here, but hey, it was still pretty fun to make. But if you all enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, like the video. More of these kinds of open journal videos are going to be coming out over time in the future, so if you really enjoy it, just be sure to stick around. Special thanks to my good friend Paragon of Torna, who was nice enough to let me use his gameplay of Octo expansion for the Octo expansion section of this timeline. And if you haven't already, go check out his channel, and if you like Xenoblade content, that's the place to go. But if you want to see more of his Splatoon content, be sure to check out his new second channel, Frythusiast. I'll link both of those in the description and leave those in the end card of the video as well. With that, ladies and gentlemen, this open journal comes to a close. And hey, if I missed anything, be sure to let me know down in the comments below. This series isn't meant to keep my own thoughts and research concrete, as it's open to everyone and their own thoughts and interpretations and opinions of the different stuff that we'll be talking about throughout this series. I'd love to see your discussions in the comments. If you enjoyed the series, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'll be making more of these video essay type videos over time, so be sure to stick around, like I said earlier. That's all for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.